Hello and welcome back to the Newman Numismatic Symposium 2020. For this hour, we are joined by Darryl A. Gomez and his presentation on the appreciation medals of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Darryl, there we go. If we can hear you now. All right, can you hear us, Darryl?
Yes, I can.
All right, we can hear you. All right.
Can you see my slides?
Yep. Your presentation is good to go. And
Great.
So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it to you. Once again, if you have any questions in the chat, just go ahead and use the Q&A button on your device, and we will hold those and answer those at the end of the session. So without further ado, take it away, Darryl.
Great, thank you. So my presentation is on the President Dwight D. Eisenhower Appreciation Medals. So during his second term as the 34th President of the United States, two not well-known President Eisenhower numismatic events occurred. First is his donation of his coin collection to the Smithsonian Institution. The second is the President's active role in awarding appreciation medals to those who aided him in his duties as President of the United States. So I'm still researching the connection between the donation and awarding of his medals. However, today's presentation provides a basic understanding of the Eisenhower Appreciation Medals. The discovery was made several years ago, 2014. I actually started my research on this topic in 2013, published a book in 2014, and just researching it for the last 7 years. So today, I'm going to provide some sort of history of the medals themselves, since they're unknown to a majority of collectors. We're going to identify the medals. There's basically 20 medals in the series, and it is a U.S. Mint series. The U.S. Mint in Philadelphia struck these medals for the use of, for President Eisenhower use. And also we look at some of the rarities. Some of these medals were actually destroyed prior to his ending his second term as president. So what I'm sharing today is basically original research based on National Archive material. So it's the primary source that I use versus anything that was published previously. Basically, there's nothing out there as of today. I have 2 books out there and some presentations that recorded at the ANA symposiums. So a lot of the material is based on memos between the White House, Director of the Mint, Philadelphia Mint, Department of State, and U.S. Treasury. So you can see the actual communication chain between these government agencies. So we can go on the next slide. So basic background information. Back in 2013, I actually saw my first Eisenhower up for auction. My Eisenhower medal was a Hawaii, June 1960. And I was curious because, yeah, it's listed in one of these regional collector books, the Hawaiian Money, 2nd edition by Metcalf and Russell. But it was basically a visual description, who manufactured it, what the mintage was, who the designer was, not even listed at all. So I actually purchased the medal and took a self-challenge to actually do research on that particular medal. And started to do the research. I found two regional books that actually documented these medals. And once again, they're just visual description. And so the Hawaiian Money book described it visually. And there was a second book, Coins, Medals, and Tokens of the Philippines, 1728 through 1794 by Aldo Basso. And it actually showed a different medal. So that kind of got me interested in looking at, hey, is this a continuation? Why are these locations? Well, the Philippine medal was June 1960, and that was it. But they got me rolling into looking for more history on these. And so I'm looking at documentation, looking at websites, and found some dealers and collectors identifying these as trip metals. But again, they were speculative in nature. They could see different locations, and metals were silver dollar size. They never considered half dollar size, which I'll go into later on. But there was basically no comprehensive study of these metals themselves. So continuing the background on the metals themselves, history doesn't document these metals correctly. Here's one that came from the American Heritage History of the US presidency, incorrectly describing Eisenhower dispersing gold medallions inscribed with "in appreciation DDE," and incorrectly describing the reverse as "peace and friendship and freedom." Upon further research, what I found looking at Frank Gasparo's confirmation as chief sculptor and engraver of the United States Mint, some of the congressional records actually says, again, this is in quote, "Appreciation medals for both President Dwight D. Eisenhower and President John F. Kennedy for presentation to dignitaries abroad." And this is an incorrect statement in congressional records, because majority of the medals were actually, the majority of the medals were given to US government employees. These include individuals serving in the US Armed Forces, Department of State, Secret Service, other government agencies. In addition, any foreign national or any allied nation performing a task with the president involved also received these medals. Example would be armed forces, security forces, and also employees of US embassies abroad. What I also found was that the heirs of the original recipients were putting these medals on the market. So some of them are actually kept as heirlooms, and some of them are being dispersed into the collector arena. So prior to 2014, there was a knowledge gap between these metals, existing of these metals. If you talk to or look at collector guidebooks, they're not listed as a series at all. So what I'm trying to say is that there's no history behind these metals until the first book was published, which was in 2014. So in 2014, I published the first book, 16 metal types identified, designers identified, Gilroy Roberts and Frank Gasparo. I found the mintages and also the destruction inventory, which is interesting. So that makes the available inventory to collectors reduce. In some cases, they're totally destroyed. I'm getting to the ones that were actually destroyed. So in 2016, I updated the book, and I organized it into different classes. Basically, there are 4 classes of the metals. And the classes are by diameter and similar or common obverse design. So what are the President Eisenhower appreciation medals? Well, they're basically products of the US Mint manufactured for President Eisenhower's use. They're informal awards given as freely as possible. So if Eisenhower meets somebody and knows what he did for his presidency, he would give a medal to him. So a lot of the medal assignments aren't documented. He would just give them out. In some cases, at the Summer White House, they actually took an inventory and assigned the medals to specific individuals. So it's pretty much for the class 2 medals at the Newport location. You can actually see a complete listing of the assignees. In some places like the Hawaii, you have a partial listing. And also the medals themselves, I consider them as presidential numismatic artifacts. If you think about it, is issued by President Eisenhower himself or direction of him. So here's the 4 classes of the President Eisenhower Appreciation Medals. Class 1 is a similar size as a US half dollar, except they found that the original test strikes were causing clashing between the reverse. The reverse on some of them are actually blank. So they would see the obverse appearing reverse on the reverse. The class 2 is the most popular because it's popular among people who know about these medals because it's the same size as a silver dollar. The class 3, which is what I call the Paris Summit event medal, they're hard to come by. In fact, it was struck in 2 types of medals, which I'll go into later on. And the class 4 is basically replication of the US Mint series list medals for the presidential inauguration. So those are also struck as blank on the reverse and used as an engraving pad. So my research actually identified a total of 20 medals. There were 13 die pairs identified. 2 of the die pairs, which you can see in the single asterisks, are used as an engraved type of medal. So they have 3 types of engravings for the class 1, and the class 4 at the bottom actually has 3 different types of engravings in the reverse also. So by poking around, I can actually identify the engraver of these medals. The engraver was David Mon, located in the Pentagon, which is still active business within the Pentagon itself. So I did reach out to him trying to find records from the late 1950s to early 60s, and unfortunately they were all destroyed. So majority of the engravings, the count of what was engraved are completely unknown in some cases. So one die pair, the class 3, was used to strike 0.9 silver metal and also 18 karat metal. These metals here were to be used as part of the Paris Summit celebration, but it never occurred because the Paris Summit collapsed. So I get into that more later on. So with these 4 classes, we can identify the metals mintages, except for the class 1 engravings. And I can actually, with my research, identify what is held in the inventory of the National Archive Record Administration, or what I call NARA. And also there's a US Treasury destruction document that shows the inventory of the metals that were destroyed. And I'll get into that later on. And based upon the subtraction of the NARA inventory and the destruction inventory, I have a available to collector net mintage that can be used for collectors. So here's the first medal. It's a class 1 medal, and you can actually see there's a US Treasury Department memo dated September 16, 1958 that calls out to manufacture 500 appreciation pieces. That's what they call it. And giving them the price. So the way you got to look at these medals, they weren't authorized by congressional authorization. It was actually directed by the director of the Mint to manufacture these. So the US Mint actually had a function to provide US government agencies the ability to make to order medals for these government agencies. And so the Eisenhower medals actually fall in the category of White House medals. So there were actually 500 medals struck. Looking at additional memos, 7 days later, it increased to 700 medals that would be struck. So 3 known engravings, and you see that in the next slide. The engravings are unknown. but the medals were first used in 1958. And again, these are the $half size medals with the special engravings on the back, and last used in 1960. So my tally for available medals to collectors is 646. From the original 700 mintage, less one, which was given to, let me skip to the next slide. William H. Brett, which is the director of the mint, had a medal specially engraved for him. There were 27 blank reverse medals held by NARA, and less 16 October 1960 medals, which you see on the screen, held by NARA. So the total is 646. So the blank reverse were used basically to honor specific individuals. In this case here, the director of the mint. Newport, Rhode Island, 1958 is the summer White House of President Eisenhower, summer 1958. And October 1960 is basically Eisenhower's tour of the United States to aid then Vice President Nixon to be elected as president. So you can look at that as supporting the Republican Party back in October. So there are 3 known Class 1 engravings. If you know of any, contact me because I'm interested in finding more. So the second group of medals are basically what I call the Goodwill Tour medals. So this slide here, the map, what you see was taken from the White House staff book. It took me some effort to go and find one and purchase one of these books. It's extremely hard to get. But it calls out the exact cities that President Eisenhower visited. Again, these were separated into 3 tours at 3 separate dates. But you can actually see Asia, South America, Middle East, well, not Middle East, Europe, Asia, North Africa, which what was called the 11 Nation Tour. The Pacific area was actually used the term Far East Tour. So the next slide. So here are the 6 medals used during his Goodwill tours. The red indicates the 11 Nation Tour. The purple is the South American tour. The green is the Pacific area medals. And it's very interesting. My research shows the red path, the medals were actually issued out of country for the first time during December 1959. South America was using Class 2 medals, and the green actually shows the different types of medals. So let me read some notes. The Class 1 is actually a hold medal. It's actually part of a keychain. Original mintage was 1,000, then later increased to 1,600. Total available medals to collectors is 1,591. So NARA has 9 in the inventory. They were issued in 11 nations, 11 countries. And what I've seen in the US market, less than 10 of these were actually being offered for sale. So this is, even though the numbers are high, you gotta remember, these are issued out of the United States and probably met the smelters. The problem is that these medals were issued overseas, and when people ask them, what is this medal? And they try to look for it in collector catalogs, they're not listed. They haven't been listed for over half a century. So the second one is the South America medal. There was actually an original mintage of 1,200, and the second request was made for 550. So that's 1,750 available medals, or well, mintage. So the available to collectors is 1,686. NARA has 24 in the inventory. 40 were destroyed by the US Treasury at the end of Eisenhower's second term as president. And from my research, this is the most common medal available to collectors. The next one is the June 1960 medal. This is the one that was listed originally by a regional Philippine collector catalog. Original mintage was 1,600. Less 22 held by NARA in its inventory. 150 were destroyed. And what I see is this is the most second most common metal available to collectors. And here's the king of the class 2 metals. This is the Japan metal. Original mintage was 500. Available to collectors is 86. If you remember the history, President Eisenhower had to cancel his trip to Japan because of the riots that occurred. There was an event that happened to the White House press secretary, James Haggerty. He actually had to be rescued by a U.S. Marine helicopter upon his arrival in Japan because all the rioters were surrounding his car. So the Japanese government says, we cannot guarantee your safety in country, and Eisenhower decided to cancel the medal. In turn, majority of the medals were destroyed. Actually, 410 medals were destroyed by the U.S. Treasury. So this is the rarest class 2 medal available to collectors. So this is the king of the class 2 medals. Next to it is the Korea June 1960 medal. Original mintage 400. Available to collectors is 225. 175 were destroyed by the U.S. Treasury, and this is the second rarest Eisenhower Appreciation Class 2 medal. The last medal on this Goodwill Tour medal series is basically the Hawaii June 1960. This is what I purchased, got me interested in these appreciation medals. Original mintage was 400. Available to collectors 267. 20 held by NARA. 105 destroyed by U.S. Treasury, and this is the fourth rarest Class 2 medal. The rarest Class 3 medal will be discussed later, but as you can see, it's very interesting, and that's why a lot of dealers, collectors made guesses that, hey, these were trip medals, because they can actually see different locations on some of the medals. So here's the blow up of the 11 Nation Goodwill Tour, which shows a flight path. You can actually see it. And it's a very pretty medal. Frank Gasparo actually designed this medal, dated 1959. And this cigar box basically was a gift to Pan Am employees. In this case, I think Ray Zook was a government employee who received a gift, which should have been done back in the day. So the next is the Newport medals. There's actually two types of the 20 medal types, a Class 1 and a Class 2. In this case here is shown on a brochure, which I somehow located by accident. Actually shows the president's tasks and actually his view from his office. So Class 1, which will be shown later on, but this is a Class 2. Summer White House was used in 1958 and again 1960. This is where President would actually do his presidential business while enjoying I guess the water area around Rhode Island, around Newport. And it's actually on a Navy base. So here's an example of what I call a provenance medal. You can actually see an unbroken chain of ownership. And I actually purchased this from Dr. Coyle. And I actually created this chart. And so President Eisenhower had a friend and neighbor, George C. Allen, which was a friend and husband. In case here, his wife, Mary Allen, actually had a sister, Helen Brewer. Sister was a mother to Michael Brewer, a son. And upon his passing, he made his estate available. Dr. Paul Coyle actually purchased a whole bunch of his Eisenhower paintings and some of his artifacts. And I got hold of just one medal from him, and it's in Newport, Rhode Island. And you can actually see, this is kind of interesting from a numismatic perspective. You can actually see a full chain of ownership from the president to the current owner. And here's another interesting Class 1 medal. So the reverse, this is the reverse here, was designed by Gilroy Roberts. He actually designed the obverse also. So there was an original mintage of 500. Currently available to collectors is 436. 14 are held by NARA, and 50 were destroyed by the U.S. Treasury. What's interesting is that this medal, this presentation set, upon further research, there were 91 of these presentation sets issued in Europe while President Eisenhower was in visiting the heads of states. So of the 436 available to collectors, 91 are basically part of presentation sets. This one here actually was in storage and got damaged. We just have the card. And the other ones basically had the metal inserted. I don't know if you can see the outline of the metal in the envelope. And also with this card, small token of my gratitude for your helpfulness. Again, this is a presentation set, and they had to mass produce this. And so this is an auto pen signature of Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is a pretty cool part of history to own, having one of these presidential sets. And here's another interesting, this is a Class 2 medal. Again, the reverse was done by Frank Gasparo. He actually did the obverse also. That is the original drawing that I got from NARA. There are other Paris Summit, but this is the one that actually showed basically a life-size rendition of the medal itself. The other ones were blow up, and there were adjustment marks on it. The White House wanted to add some words, and they said, no, it's not possible. And so this guy here has actually been certified by NGC. The original mintage was 1,200. Again, you got to remember, Paris Summit collapsed in 1960. Available to collectors was 709. 491 was destroyed by the U.S. Treasury. Again, it was the collapse of the 1960 Paris Summit. And so this is one case where, if you remember the history, a U-2 got shot down, and Paris Summit went belly up when Khrushchev presented evidence that, yeah, we had something flying over the United States. It wasn't a weather balloon. And the next slide actually talks about the rarest of the Eisenhower medals. So one of the things I got to show you, so this is a voucher for payment between the White House and Superintendent of the Mint, which is Ray V. Beester. She's the superintendent of the U.S. Mint at Philadelphia. And the thing you got to be interested in this, it shows you very historically what's happening. In order to manufacture these metals, they don't require enacted federal law to provide, to manufacture these metals, or put a limit, or put a restriction on design, or limit on mintages, things like that. So the director of the Mint saw the demand that White House wanted specific gold medals and silver medals to commemorate well accepted Paris Summit. So they requested 3 18-karat gold, and again, no physical pictures are known, so I have to actually come up with a rendition based upon this document. USSR, France, United Kingdom, and USA. There was actually another memo that actually says, instead of using the Paris Summit medal, they wanted Paris, May 1960 on the obverse. Again, unraveling the history and looking at documents and figure out what was the intent. So the two of the medal types were awarded, gifted at attendance. Should have been accepted. Well, should have been presented to the heads of state and also the delegates. Heads of states would receive the gold medal, and the delegates, assuming 10 from each country, would receive the silver medal. So this is kind of interesting history that ties in world event, U-2 being shot down over Soviet airspace, and also the dates being lined up. So U-2 was shot down May 1st, and payment was requested on May 12th. But I found some other additional information that Philadelphia Mint received the request to manufacture on May 3rd. So it's several days later, a couple days later after the event. So these metals were probably an afterthought of the U-2 event versus something that was supposed to happen and the U-2 event came in its way. So these metals were basically destroyed since the Paris Summit collapsed. Records show that the 3 gold medals were actually destroyed. But what's interesting is that if you study the destruction inventory from the US Treasury, it actually calls out 27 of these metals being destroyed. So somehow 3 metals are actually missing or available to collectors. So that's, if you can find one of these, that would be outstanding. I'm not sure how 3 survived. People can surmise saying, hey, they were given to the heads of states. But again, Paris Summit collapsed, and the best thing to do is just destroy these metals. There's a lot of interesting histories. And after the Paris Summit, Eisenhower went to Portugal. And here's a case where NGC actually certified this metal. And here's a stamp, well, a cover with the date of Eisenhower's visit. So the original mintage was 250. Available to collectors is 250, and this is the 3rd rarest class 2 metal. So this is the October support Republicans for the upcoming November 1960 elections. These metals were actually used at different locations, given most likely to security personnel, providing security to the president. A lot of these metals were actually, can be obtained. This is a hint, can be obtained from former Secret Service people. I've seen a whole bunch of these metals put on the market by former Secret Service individuals. So again, 700 blank, and one of the metals known, the Brett metal, Newport unknown, and October 1960 unknown. However, NARA holds 16 of these October 1960 metals. So what's the difference between end of term destruction versus what's the NARA? End of term destruction would mean that somebody was in charge in handling all the metals, and they counted it and say, hey, this is what we have on hand in our inventory. After the president left office, a lot of the items from the presidency were inventory, and metals showed up, being stored away in drawers or things like that. In this case here, 16 of these metals probably was in President Eisenhower's inventory, personal inventory. There were cases where some of the metals were actually in his drawer, in his desk, and he would call people in the Oval Office and say, I got something for you, and he would give them a medal. So a lot of these medals were not giving actually at the abroad locations. Some were actually held back, but at the end, prior to the end of President Eisenhower's 2nd term in office, those medals that would be accounted for were actually given to U.S. Treasury. The other ones were actually given out and now is in the possession of NARA as presidential artifacts. So NARA holds 16 of these October 1960 medals. So Next slide is what I call the class 4 metals. And you can actually see the different types of engravings on them. This one here says, with appreciation of loyal services on the White House staff, with personal and official gratitude for its selfless and invaluable service on the White House staff. And this one here is the most valuable one, I would say, because it shows selfless and invaluable service to our nation. So there's a history on these medals. All our renditions based upon White House memos. Again, David Mann actually engraved these medals. The medals themselves are quite rare because they're held by heirs of people who actually received the medals themselves. But what's interesting is that my rendition is very close to what was actually in the Richard Nixon Library, Presidential Library. So the story goes is that when I was creating the second book, I had renditions, and I said, well, let me go on and search for an actual medal. And so I'm looking at the listing of individuals. So we have an actual inventory of the medal description and who it was actually awarded to. In this case here, invaluable service to our nation, Nixon is the top person. I said, let me go find something from the Nixon Library. So I actually contacted the Nixon Library and said that, hey, this is a rendition. Do you have any history about this medal? And or if you have an actual image of these medals, of this medal, and they forwarded me a photograph. And this is kind of interesting. Original White House material removed in 1950 as this platform. And so this is in the Richard M. Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. So when they saw my rendition that matched this, I said, let me send you a draft copy of my chapter on the Class 4 medals. And when they received it, they'll look at that and say, this is the history that we've been looking for, right? Because prior to that, they didn't know what this medal was given to President Nixon. Why the reason? What's the reason? And they were ecstatic when I said, hey, I know why these medals were given out. It was end of basically Eisenhower's second term of ending of Eisenhower's second term in office. And what was interesting is that they said that they're going to keep the draft chapter along with the medal. I said, I'll do one better. I'll send you the book. So they actually have a book at the Eisenhower Library, my second book. And also the Eisenhower Library has my book. So my book is in 2 presidential libraries. It's kind of impressive to me. So before we go to Q&A, let me show you, do a summary of these medals. So I organized the medals by diameter, size, and common obverse design. So you can actually see with appreciation, DDE. The way you read this, my surname, Gomez, class 1, and this is the type 1. This is a blank. And A is engraving 1, B engraving 2, C engraving 3, which is October 1960. Again, this is the class 2, class 1, type 2, which is the 1959, raised 1959 design. Class 1, type 3, which is the better understanding reverse. So it's kind of organized. And the way I organized it too was that I wanted to make sure that if somebody wanted to take a set of medals and put it in a different category of numismatics, it can be done. In this case here, I thought maybe so-called half dollars collectors can look at these and say, hey, yeah, these are $half size. But again, I just thought about that, making it available to other collectors, or other specialties. And that's why the class 2 was provided. I had in mind maybe so-called dollar collectors can look at these and say, hey, yeah, they're dollar size. But again, they have to meet the criteria to actually be a so-called dollar. But again, Class 2, Type 1, South America, Class 2, Type 2, Paris Summit 1960, Type 3, Portugal, Type 4, Japan, Type 5, June 1960, Type 6, Korea, Type 7, Hawaii, June 1960, and Type 8, which is the Newport 1960. In the Class 3, I gave gold higher, Type 1, and silver, Type 2. I do call out the dimensions and the fineness of the metal on the top of the slides too. So this is a little bit larger than a little bit thicker than a US half dollar to avoid the clashing. They wanted a smooth back, smooth reverse. In the Class 4, again, blank is Type 1, A engraving 1, well, engraving A, engraving B, and engraving C. So, questions?
All right, thank you for the presentation. I can go ahead and delegate some of these questions towards you. Just a reminder to the audience that you can use the Q&A feature on your device, and from there we can receive some questions. This first question, asker would like to know how many Class 4 coins were struck?
Okay, the total amount was 125. Oh, let me go over the numbers. I missed the numbers for the Class 4. So let's try and go back on my slides. Is that possible?
Yep.
So for the total number was 125 uniface medals. With the loyal services, 22 medals were issued with this engraving. With the invaluable service on the White House staff, 35 medals were issued. And with the invaluable service to our nation, 49 were issued. There was a inventory NARA has, which is 16 of these uniface medals. And also, with my research, 3 medals were gifted to the city of Gettysburg, and that's something I need to find out where it's located. Recipients are unknown based upon my research. I think that answers the question. The medal obverse is basically taken from the 1953, 1957 dated U.S. Mint Presidential Medal Series, which reflects the Eisenhower first and second inauguration. They're listed as U.S. Mint less medals 133 and 134. I know of one individual who actually has one of these medals. Again, it's invaluable service to our nation. It was given to a general, and I got permission to use his image in the book and trying to update. So that's the first time I actually saw one of these medals other than a Nixon medal. So that's kind of interesting history. Again, heirs are holding on to these. They're historic, tied to the presidency and to the family member.
Yeah, certainly valuable with that. This next question asker would like to know, with the Japan medal, you said 500 were made, with 410 being destroyed and 86 available to collectors. Are there any ideas as to where the other 4?
So the 4 is actually held in NARA in their inventory. So that should account for all 500. This is one of the tough medals. It took me basically 6 years to actually acquire one. And it was expensive because they knew what they was having. So my history goes that my lessons learned is that these medals weren't published at all. Anybody didn't know nothing about it. And stupid me published a book and everybody started collecting it. I should have done was collect everything, then publish my book.
Certainly a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
getting that information. But that's, once again, I mean, thank you for doing such extensive like time and research putting into like, tracking all these down. I couldn't imagine not having this sort of information available for the collection.
Yeah, and that's why I gave this introduction discussion, is because some of the medals appear every so often, you know, like on eBay, things like that, and people underbid them because they don't know what it is. And I've been collecting whatever I can, even though it's damaged. I got one that was made into a necklace from the Philippines. I actually purchased it from Philippines. Some of the medals actually, like the presentation sets, actually got them from France. Someone was selling it and offered and said, "Hey, I got this. What is it?" And I said, "Hey, yeah, I'll purchase it from you." So very unknown. And you can remember too, first issued in 1958, right? And if you count when it first started to actually have a mint series about him, that was in 2014. That's like over half a century gap. And my accumulation of these medals show that a lot of them were acid tested or polished. You remember too, they're receiving it, and the heirs would polish them and say, "Hey, yeah, I got a shiny medal from the president that my grandfather got," and so they're damaged. Some of them were actually, like, for some of them, actually got it from a Secret Service agent, basically. Tried to trace the history on it, and he was smart. He put it in a plastic case, and it kept it in mint state. I got it graded by NGC, and it came back as mint state 66. But a lot of them are damaged. They're polished. They're acid tested. You see little silver spots removed or spots, and it's like, hey. So the numbers I gave you, basically available, you got to think about it that they weren't documented for 50 years. So a lot of mishandling, a lot of acid tests. So my perspective, I say, whatever numbers I blurted out, 10% is damage. That's the way you got to look at it. Not documented for 50 years. You got a whole bunch of them being melted, damage through mishandling. The worst one I saw was that somebody actually tried to make a medallion, a wearable medallion on it, and the edges are corroded. Other ones were hairline scratches, things like that. But there are some out there that were saved in proof-like, and those were the ones that I try to look for. So my collection is, I have numerous medals. I graded some. I sent some of them to NGC. They said that they would grade them, and apparently they started to grade these because I see some pop up that weren't mine. But if you remember looking at them, I actually put down. Here's an example: Darryl Gomez collection. And what it is that it's not for prestige. It's more of that. Hey, this is a collection of medals that was used to do the research, the original research on the appreciation of them. That's the intent. I don't plan to sell them. Plan to probably pass it on to my son. But the thing is that you know that this belonged to the original researcher. So,
Absolutely.
any more questions?
Yes.
I'm gonna go on and on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Great job with the provenance acquisition on the Newport medal. Should we create these provenance documents for key metals for increase in resale price?
Yes. So I did allude to class 5, which is, I did not discuss, it's not on topic, but class 5 is a President Kennedy medal. And I noticed that a lot of the Kennedy medals have provenance that can go back to the president. One case, the medal itself was awarded to a U.S. Embassy employee in Dublin, Ireland. when President Eisenhower was visiting Ireland. And so I got the provenance established, made sure, well, the original recipient passed away, the wife is still alive. She's the one who offered the medal to me. And I said, sure. I gave her a fair price, and I said, you got to sign these documents. But I won't reveal his name, but if you search his name, it actually shows that he was actually in Dublin, Ireland, not receiving the medal itself, but he was stationed there. And the history goes that you can start following the path like that, saying that, hey, this medal has provenance from the president to the current owner. And that's the thing I'm looking at. You can find things like that, establish the provenance. It's a history gathering type of means to show that, hey, this medal has a connection to the president. It's not like something being, what do you call it? Manufactured and tossed around. And that was one of the misinformation that was given out early, was that a lot of people look at these medals as souvenir pieces post after the visit, and they were just manufactured. The logistics for these medals is horrendous, because the medals had to be prepared before the president left, had to travel with the president to the overseas location. In some instances, the medals were first issued out of the United States, given out to people. And when they come back, they would have leftovers and probably go sit in the inventory, someone's inventory, and had to be destroyed after not being used. Again, the thing was that I think Eisenhower made a decision that all medals accounted for had to be destroyed, because he didn't want none of these medals to be issued while he left office. So that's why they were reduced. And the other ones that were found after he left office basically is now in possession of the National Archives as presidential artifacts. So I treat these medals as presidential numismatic artifacts. They should be maybe a little higher than the peace medals. Peace medals were actually manufactured by U.S. Mint and given out to the American Indians based upon the president's time in office. In this case here, there are specific locations, specific dates that were issued. And there's a lot of history, and I keep on digging for more history about these. In one case, when President Eisenhower was in Taiwan, or Formosa, during his trip, he actually got aided by one of the hotel staff in fixing something in his room or something. And so he sent his secretary and said, this is from President Eisenhower, it's one of his June 1960 medals. And it's actually documented in the one of the Taiwan newspaper. I think I got a clip of it, but I didn't want to share it because it's bad, what do you call it? Blurry, kind of blurry.
Yeah, no worries. I was going to ask, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to know, obviously, a lot of these medals have had a lot of like travel time and have been to various places. What has been sort of the furthest, or whether it be like traveled the furthest just like around passing many hands, or like was just sort of received, like how far it was, like what have been sort of some of the places that you've more exotic, or maybe further places that you've received?
I think the 11 Nation is the most exotic one, because some of these places, you gotta remember too, back in 1958, there were allies to the United States, like Iran and Afghanistan. So one of the things I tried to do too was that, besides being a coin collector and numismatic, I'm into some stamps, right? Stamp covers. So what I try to do is like find covers with the stamps from different locations. So I got I got all of them except for one country. And the problem area is Afghanistan. I think the mail service there was not existent, but a lot of them actually put down President Eisenhower's visit and got the date of when he was actually in the country. And interesting, I think I got all of the South America countries that he visited, the locations. And in some cases here, I got the Philippines, Taiwan, and Korea. Wake Island, I don't see any. And what's interesting is it's on his June 12th to 26th. He actually visited the 2 states that he signed into statehood, Alaska and Hawaii. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, Afghanistan one is, I think, the most interesting.
Absolutely.
Medal. So it's a good series. And I didn't cover this because this is more introduction to the specific type of medals, how to identify them, have a feel for the mintages, see what the rarity was. But these medals themselves are what I call special government medals made for U.S. government agencies. They don't require, I think I alluded to it, they don't require an enacted federal law to actually produce these medals. The director of the Mint actually has 3 functions. And if you go search on the internet, just look for the manufacturing triad, the U.S. Mint, you can see what I try to discuss on how things were approved. So this path here doesn't require enacted federal law. All you have to do is make a request to the U.S. Mint saying, hey, I need 500 Hawaii medals. And they would, in some cases, informally agree upon making the medals, like a phone call. Hey, can you increase my my medal count to by 550? And they would say, sure. And you're on to, they're getting paid for guaranteed work of manufacturing these medals. So it was like manufacture on demand, which is unheard of in numismatics that the U.S. Mint is doing. And that's one of the things I'm trying to point out, is that this is the case where the White House made requests, but, and there's not documented. The reason why it's not documented, it's a government agency to government agency purchase, and those are not made public. That's why showing this letter here is one of the key finds. So I have all these voucher for transfers for all the medals I located within the narrow files. For the Eisenhower medals, for the Kennedy medal, which is off topic, I have not found that yet. But what's interesting is that the White House would pay for some of these medals in all, and in some cases, they would agree with the State Department, hey, you got to pay a percentage of the cost because we're doing something in your embassy and promoting goodwill. So in some cases, you can actually see a percentage being reimbursed. The ones that I remember seeing that were paid by the U.S. by the I can't see this, by the State Department was this 11 nation tour, and I think part of this South America tour were paid by the Treasury Department. I mean, by the Department of State. So it's kind of interesting. So a lot of history goes between these, what I call special government medals. You might have seen these. I came up with a term, President of the United States Special Government Medal. And I try to give them a unique name to stand out as when I first made the discovery. But what I found out is that this manufacturing triad, these special medals for U.S. government agencies, besides the White House, you have the CIA, you have the Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior. You got a whole bunch of U.S. government agencies using this mechanism. And that's the thing I'm currently researching, is that what is this mechanism and who can use it? And that's why you don't see, if you look out, go look at the auction site like eBay, you might see a Department of Interior medal. I think there was a gold one out there, and it was like, hey, that's 18 karat gold. And how come it's not documented anywhere? And the reason why, it's a U.S. government agency transfer. It's a, in what do you call it? It's not supposed to be made public. And that's why you don't see anything like this. You look at the Treasury Department, you look at the Department, the U.S. Mint records, you don't see the public records. You don't see anything listed as that. Hey, I printed out, or I manufactured 500 Hawaii medals. You don't see that at all. It's all interagency type of transfer, and that's why it's hard to actually identify the mintages. In some cases, you can actually, at least for the White House medals, you can actually know what the mintages are. So my goal is to actually look at each government agency, which I kind of did. I had a presentation with the ANA World's Fair, I think back in 2018, to try to explain that, hey, I'm investigating these medals, these government medals. Mintages aren't known. They're struck in gold, struck in silver, struck in copper, well, and bronze. And how come they're not documented? And you got to remember too, there's a document that I found that the medals, at least for the Department of Interior, were first made available to the government agencies back in 1948. And you can actually look at some of these medals, they have special engravings in the back. You can see the date 1948 on it. And that's historic that these medals were first manufactured in 1948 and nothing's documented. Some collectors try to do that, but again, they're not officially seen as a U.S. Mint medal because they don't have evidence that they were manufactured by U.S. Mint.
Got it. So I believe that's about all the time we have for this block. Is there any parting words or any way, if people want to reach you with questions, or how can they find you?
So I actually have a website. It's called POTUS, POTUS-SCG.com. And I try to put some videos in there, try to explain, show some documents, describing the medals themselves, how I originated actually the 5 classes. I include the Kennedy at my website.
Oh.
And the thing I'm looking at is that if any other person can find out that besides Kennedy and Eisenhower had these medals, I'll appreciate it, because I've been looking at it and it's like, these are the only 2 presidents that actually use this type of medals. Yeah, specifically with the term "with appreciation." So my email is at that website. You can also just search for me on the ANA website. I have a blog there that I periodically update. My username is Dr. Darryl out there, so you can actually see some of my postings about these medals themselves. And I give more examples of provenance. Besides medals, I show provenance between an actual Eisenhower dollar given to Nixon to a congressman, in which I purchased it from a congressman estate. So the provenance is actually Nixon, congressman to me, and I have 2 specimens like that. And it's interesting. I'm a collector of anything related to the presidency that was manufactured by the U.S. Mint. So.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have to check that out. Well, I believe our next presentation is starting soon. Thank you all again for watching. Once again, thank you, Darryl, for presenting, and we hope to see you all at some of these other presentations for today.
All right. Thanks. Thank you for watching.